Hi everyone, I'd like to welcome you to the channel, and I'm not going to do a lot of talking leading into this because I've got a lot of material to cover and I don't want to drag this video out too long. So I'm just going to say welcome. I hope that you will like this video, and more than that, I hope that you'll subscribe. What I'm going to be talking about today, and I'm going to try not to talk too fast, but as I get to talking about this topic, I tend to get excited and I end up talking 90 to nothing. But what I'm going to be talking about today is the very thing that is kind of the heart of what I'm trying to talk about on this channel. I keep saying over and over, the King is coming. That is what I'm talking about today. And I'm going to give you what I believe is biblical evidence that Jesus is coming back soon. Of all the things that are happening in the world right now that would point to the soon return of the King of Kings, there is one thing that happened some years ago that scholars much smarter than me I've heard referred to as the super sign that Jesus is coming back. And that's what I'm going to be talking about. And what that super sign is the birth of the nation of Israel. So let's just jump right into this. If you look in the Old Testament, God calls out Abraham and tells him to follow him and tells him he's going to give him a land that will be his land and his descendants' land. Abraham has a son named Isaac. Isaac has a son named Jacob. God at one point changes Jacob's name to Israel, and Israel's family becomes a people group, and it becomes the tribes of Israel, and then eventually the nation of Israel. And so when God is bringing this people group, the people of Israel, into this land that he was going to give them, he tells them, I'm going to bless you, and he gives them this whole list of wonderful things he'll do if they follow him and if they are faithful to him. But he also tells them, if you disobey me, if you turn from me, and the biggest thing is if you chase after false gods, other gods, I'm going to curse you. And basically the ultimate end to this cursing, if they continue following after false gods, is God says that he will destroy them as a nation, not as a people, but as a nation. And I'm going to scatter you all over the earth. And you can see I'm showing you verses of Scripture that God refers to these things. This absolutely happened. Israel was a great nation. They were destroyed as a nation, and the Jewish people, the people of Israel, were scattered all over the entire earth, probably to just about every country in the world. That happened historically. But one of the things God tells them, when he tells them this is going to happen, is he tells them there's going to come a day after I've scattered your descendants all over the earth that I'm going to bring your descendants back to this land that I have given you, and they will be a nation again. And you see the scripture there that tells this. All right, again, historically, that absolutely happened when Israel became a nation again in 1948. And this is kind of interesting because if you look at commentaries that even biblical scholars wrote prior to Israel becoming a nation, there were some that said, somehow, yes, this is going to happen. Israel will be a nation again. And many of these scholars were ridiculed because no one hardly could conceive how Israel not only would be a nation again, but that the people would be back in the land where their ancestors had been a nation. But it happened in 1948. Israel was reborn. So from there, we're going to go to the New Testament, to Matthew 24. Jesus' disciples ask him, what will be the signs of your return and of the end of the age? And it's very interesting. I could go a completely different direction with this video. I'm not going to, but Jesus gives them a list of things that will be happening at that time when his return is near. And if you look at these things, it's like he's reading the news of what's going on in the world today. But in talking about the rebirth of the nation of Israel, and this being the super sign that Jesus is going to return, we're going to look at part of this chapter, Matthew chapter 24, verses 32 through 34. And that says, and this is Jesus speaking, "Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that the summer is near. So you also, when you see all these things, know that it is near at the doors. Assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. And I'm reading this out of the Gospel of Matthew, but Jesus also gives this same teaching in Luke 21. So what does this mean? Jesus is talking about a fig tree. Well, there are things throughout the Bible in the Old Testament where God will use something else, an object or something, to compare it to Israel. Well, the fig tree in the Old Testament, and I'll show several examples on the screen, when God refers to the fig tree, He's likening it to Israel's life as a nation. So what is Jesus saying? Well, quite obviously, He's talking about Israel as a nation. So if He's talking about Israel as a nation, what does He mean when He talks about the fig tree and says, when its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that the summer is near? Well, what does that mean? Well, when a tree's branch becomes tender and it puts forth leaves, what does that mean? It means the tree is alive. And so what Jesus seems to be saying here is when Israel is alive again, when the nation of Israel has life again, this generation is not going to pass away until all these things I'm talking about, which He's also talking about His return. This generation is not going to pass away until I return. So let's ask the question again. What does that mean? Because Jesus is talking about a generation. And in modern terms, we don't tend to think of a generation as a set period of time. We tend to think of it as different generations, such as you have my generation, and the generation before that was my parents' generation, and the generation before that was my grandparents' generation. So what is Jesus talking about when He refers to a generation? Because a generation doesn't have a set period of time, right? Or does it? Now this next part is speculation on my part. There have been many that have made this speculation, but I think this is good speculation, because the Bible does seem to answer this question in what is a generation? What is a generation of man? In Psalm 90:10, it spells out that the years of man's life are 70 to 80 years. So let's think about what that's saying. If it's saying that the years of man's life are 70 to 80 years, we know that's not talking literally about every single person, that everyone that lives is going to live between 70 and 80 years, because people live longer than that. And in biblical times, when it was written, people lived longer than that. In fact, in the Old Testament, you have people that lived far, far, far beyond 80 years. Moreover, this particular psalm, Psalm 90, was written by Moses. Moses lived 120 years, according to the Bible. So this is not saying all people are going to live between 70 and 80 years. This must be talking about, generally speaking, God considers the years of man's life averaged from 70 to 80 years. So now let's look at that. If this is what Jesus is referring to as a generation, 70 to 80 years, and if the generation that saw Israel become a nation again, and we'll just say the generation that was born the year Israel became a nation again, which happened in 1948, we're going to take the top end of that number that Psalms gives us, 80 years. You add 80 years to 1948, and you come up with the year 2028. So again, I say Jesus seems to be saying the generation that sees Israel become a nation again will not pass away, will not be gone from the earth before He returns. Now, am I saying Jesus has to come back by 2028? And I want to make it very clear, I'm not predicting when Jesus is going to come back. And one of the arguments I've heard people say, anytime I've presented this, and I've heard people say this all my life as well, that, well, Jesus said that no one would know the time that He could return. And even people that'll say it's impossible to know because Jesus said no one would know. That's not actually what Jesus said. In fact, Jesus actually addressed this in the same chapter of Matthew, Matthew 24, just a few verses down from where I left off. I left off at verse 34. Verse 36, He he says, well, actually, we'll read 35 and 36. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. But the day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. And I just want to throw in there, I've heard people say, well, Jesus is even saying he doesn't know. I believe, if anything, Jesus was saying that at this time, while Jesus was on the earth, he had reserved the right to just that being the Father's information. Jesus knows now, in his glory, he knows when he will be coming back. But if you look at what he says, Jesus is not saying you can't know the time. Jesus is saying you can't know the day or the hour. That is very, very specific. Yeah, the precise time, absolutely. No one knows that. But Jesus is telling us this in a teaching where he's saying, when this happens, you will know I am soon to return. And when you see this happen, and this happen, and this happen, and this happen, be looking, because my return is near. It is at the door. So I believe Jesus was giving us a clue as to when he was coming back. And that is why it is so important to tell others that they need to be right with Jesus. That is why I am saying over and over and over, the King is coming. And so in wrapping this up, there's just a couple of things I want to finish up with. First of all, I want to say, if you've enjoyed what I'm talking about here, or if this has gotten you fired up, and maybe you can hear it in my voice, I'm fired up. This is the type of video I want to be doing. The types of videos I have decided I need to be doing are videos talking about, obviously, the King is coming, because if you watched any of my videos, you know I am just really, really beating that drum. I want to talk about that, and I want to talk about the need for you to be right with the King, with Jesus Christ, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, so that you will avoid all of the terrible things that are going to happen as we draw closer to the end of the age. The second thing I want to say is there are two opinions of what Jesus could be talking about in talking about his return. One is he could be talking about the rapture, which is when Jesus is going to come in the clouds, and as Jesus talks about, receive us unto himself, the church, his people, that we will meet him in the clouds and we will be with the Lord. The other opinion is that he's talking about, when he's talking about his return, his second coming, which is a totally different event that will occur after the rapture, probably 7 years, at least 7 years, because we don't know when the actual tribulation will start after the rapture. But from the time the tribulation period that the Bible refers to starts till his return will be 7 years. We're told that in Revelation and in Daniel. And that will be when Jesus will actually come and set foot back on the earth in Jerusalem and will set up his kingdom as Lord over the earth. I tend to lean towards Jesus is talking about his return being the second coming, which means, if that's true, the rapture is even sooner. But either way, if this is talking about the rapture, and it is going to occur between 2028 and 29, you need to be ready, and you need to be telling everyone you know, if you are ready, you need to be telling everyone you know they need to be right with the Lord. And I have 2 links in the description, which these will probably be in every video I do, where I'm explaining to you how you can be right with God, how you can have a relationship with Jesus, and how you can know when you die. And that's the other thing. We're talking about Jesus coming back. Any one of us, myself or anybody listening, could meet death before that time. You need to be right with the Lord. And I'm going to have some videos in the description box, some links you can click. One of them is a very brief description. It's about 4 minutes. And then if you feel led, there's a longer one that's about 15 minutes that goes greater into detail about how you can be sure about these things. If you don't know the Lord, please at least take the time to listen to one of those videos. The last thing I want to say is, again, if you liked what I'm talking about in this video, this is basically going to be the jumping off point for just about everything I do from here on. The topic I'm talking about in this video, how we are nearing the end and how his return is at the door. The King is coming. Let's be prepared, y'all. Let's tell others. Thank you so much for listening. As always, I'm bringing you all of this in love and hope that you will consider these things. And more than that, I hope you're right with Jesus. Thank you so much.